In Centrals and Locals selected stores and availability.
It's 9 o'clock across the UK.
I've got a question about tuition fees. We pay all this tax and people across Europe can go to universities in Scotland and not pay a penny. It's just not fair.
The decisions on how Scottish universities are funded is for the
I know, but what are you going to do about it?
I'm trying to explain to you.
The most talked about radio show is here. Call Clegg. 0345 6060 973. Get straight through now. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's time for the very first Call Clegg of 2015 with me, Nick Clegg, slightly croaky this morning, but nonetheless no worse for it, here on LBC. And I'll be taking your questions for the next half an hour, so do get involved, get in touch. Call on 0345 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And of course you can watch, as ever, on the website lbc.co.uk. But let's go straight to the first caller, who is Sean from Matfield. Hello, Sean.
Morning, Mr. Clegg. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Not too bad. You sound like Barry White this morning.
I'm a bit. I think it sounds worse than it is.
Don't break into song. Serious point. I'm trying to lighten the load, but this is deadly serious. The Cobra meeting's taking place today. Why did it not take place last night? Why was the security state not increased? Because the likes of global communications say it was a free, open market to discuss views. Some nut job can walk through the doors today and cause havoc. If they'd have been told the security state had increased, they may have doubled their security on the gates this morning. This is an attack on their basic freedoms, what happened in Paris, and that meeting should have happened already.
So, Sean, you're talking about the Cobra Committee?
The Cobra meeting, the security state should be high now.
Yeah. So, Sean, we've raised the security level some weeks ago. That's already happened, and of course, our intelligence services and the police work flat out all the time, regardless of whether a Cobra meeting is taking place in Whitehall or not, to keep ourselves safe. And they do an extraordinary job, and they thwart a lot of threats that we don't hear about. And in my time as Deputy Prime Minister, I've been enormously impressed by their professionalism, their dedication to keeping us safe. I think it is right that Theresa May is chairing this Cobra committee this morning, just to sort of absolutely stress test and double check that all the measures that might need to take place in light of this barbaric murder yesterday of journalists in central Paris, that every possible eventuality about how that might affect us is properly addressed, and that's why Cobra is happening this morning.
But that wasn't the question, respectfully, Deputy Prime Minister. Why didn't it happen last night? Is what Sean's driving at. Yeah.
I think I can reassure Sean that everybody swings into action immediately the moment a terrible incident like this happens.
Why did not information go to, say, Global, say, look, double man your doors this morning, double secure the doors. We don't know what's going to happen next. They've attacked a guy who does cartoons, basically, a firm that do cartoons, and murdered 12 people. Nick's just had a very, very, very vibrant debate about this. And, yes, it was quite inflammatory. Nick controlled it very well, but certain people take it the wrong way. Instructions should be led by Home Office to people like Global to say, look, double security this morning. That's what happened in Northern Ireland in the 80s when I was a soldier. You have to preempt this, Mr. Clegg.
Well, as I say, I think we are doing a lot. Of course we are. This is, look, the threat. The terrorist threat to our country, as you know, is not new. And the threat, as it appears to be the case, from people who are perverting Islam to their own violent ends, is not new either. That's, by the way, Sean, why we're passing legislation as I speak now through Parliament to tighten further our protection against those who might go to Syria and Iraq, become drenched in blood and made even more dangerous through the ideological indoctrination that they experience there. We're making sure that those people who do pose a danger when they come back, that we can properly cater for them. So,
Mr. Clegg, back to Sean's central point. This is the last time. Why not last night? It will be virtually 24 hours since the atrocity took place before the British government can actually get itself into a meeting room at Downing Street. Why? Why the delay?
I think the point I'm trying to make is and Theresa May would be the first to confirm this, is that security measures don't only take place because a Cobra meeting takes place. Okay. Security measures happen immediately. They exist already and have done for a long period. They're being tightened up all the time. We're passing legislation, as I say, as we speak now, to tighten them further. A meeting of Cobra is just a forum in which we can absolutely double check that any other kind of immediate after effects because of the attack in Paris are being properly anticipated. But I really do want to reassure Sean, and indeed all listeners, that it's not as if somehow sort of nothing happens until a meeting happens in Whitehall. A lot happens all the time, has done for months, and of course for years, right. And we constantly make sure that we tighten the arrangements where we can to make ourselves safer.
Let's move on, Deputy Prime Minister. Where are we going now?
Second caller is Colin in Newcastle. Hello, Colin.
Good morning, Nick. First of all, condolences to the families of the people in France.
Yeah, absolutely.
But moving on, as a serving policeman who's directly under threat from the terrorism, what we need is not more meetings or more legislation. When are you, the Gov Coalition, to release the £50 million at Hogan House, the Met Police Commissioners asked for to counter terrorism? It's not, COVID meetings are fine. We can have lots of meetings, lots of legislation. We need boots on the ground. We need money to fight them. He's requested the £50 million. So far, you refused to give them that money. When are you going to release it? Simple.
So, Colin, I'm not entirely clear what sort of 50 million you're referring to. Of course, money needs to be provided to those who keep us safe, which is why, for instance, the money which has been provided to the intelligence agencies has gone up. In recent times, we've increased it precisely to reflect their increased workload. You're equally, though, right to say that the police generally, like many aspects of the public services, have had to make savings, and in some cases substantial savings, in order to balance the books for all the reasons you're familiar with. I think what we're trying to do is get the balance right to make sure that both the intelligence agencies and the Met Police, who take the lead for police forces across the country on anti-terrorism investigations and activity, are properly resourced in doing so. My experience so far is that the police have been extremely professional and effective at getting this balance right between making savings where savings need to be made, but not doing so at the cost of public safety.
Quick response from you, Colin.
Unfortunately, obviously, Nick Clegg doesn't listen to your show, because Hogan Howe said on your show a few weeks ago he asked the government for the 50 million to counter terrorism, and so far they've refused to give it to him. Maybe Nick Clegg needs to listen to your show a bit more often, and we'll find out what's going on in the world.
Mr. Clegg, do you want to respond to Colin there? It was on this
Colin,
show.
I of course would love to listen to the show all the time. There are one or two other things I need to do most days of the week. But
it's available on podcasts.
All right, but I will. Of course, Colin, I will do. Since you've suggested, I will find out obviously what Bernard Hogan House said, but also whether that was money which was only for anti-terrorist activity, or whether it was in the context of general pressure on policing and police resources in London, and indeed in police forces elsewhere in the country.
All right, we move on. Where are we going next?
Next, James in Muswell Hill. Hello, James.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you? Good morning.
I'm very good, mate. I'm terrified about the state of the National Health Service, personally, because I've had an amazing experience with it. I've had 3 children that have been looked after by the NHS. Two of them were twins, and they were born 8 weeks premature. They were dealt with through the NHS service, which was amazing. Mm-hmm. My daughter has a heart condition that's congenital, that has been dealt with by the NHS. She had 3 operations. It's all been dealt with by the NHS. Everything's been dealt with. Yeah. I think this system is being pulled apart by a clique of people that never have to use it. Never used it. They've never used it. Clegg, you've never used it, really, have you?
Of course I have.
You have, okay. But I don't think Osborne has. I don't think Cameron has. I think they're private. Okay?
So what is your question? If I move you to a question, James, I want a question if I could, sir.
Go for it.
What is your question? Well, what do you say? You asked Mr. Clegg, does he use it? And he said he has. Is that it?
No. My question is, what's going to happen to the National Health Service?
What's going to happen to Mr. Clegg?
No, James. I mean, you're right, of course, to express your passion for the NHS, and it's one I share. Funny enough, I was on Monday morning. I was visiting a hospital in southwest London, Kingston Hospital, where my third son was born there five years ago, and I visited the A&E department there. And in many ways, what I heard from the outstanding nurses, doctors, and others who are working at A&E department, I suspect is typical from around the country, which is that more and more people are coming into A&E on a huge scale. We're now 2,000 more patients are being seen within the 4-hour waiting list per day in A&E departments across the country than was the case a few years ago. And of course, the question we need to ask ourselves is, why has that happened? And indeed, what, if anything, can we do about it? Now, there are some obvious things we need to do. We need to provide more money to the NHS and more nurses and doctors. There are just under 5,000 more nurses over the last year, which employed in the NHS, 2,000 more, just shy of 2,000 more doctors over the last year. We've put in, announced significant extra money, £700 million for this winter, £2 billion we announced in the autumn statement. I've just recently set out my party's plans for meeting the overall funding gap in the coming years, identified by a man called Simon Stevens, who sort of runs the NHS on all of our behalves. But I think there's a big underlying issue, and again, this was confirmed by the conversations I had with the folk at the A&E department at Kingston Hospital, which is that we do have, of course, an ageing population. So you've got an increasingly large number of people who are getting older and older, living longer, which is great, but it means they have age-related health conditions, which can keep them in hospital beds for some considerable periods of time. And then there seems to be a real issue about once they're judged to be clinically judged to be ready to leave hospital, to then make sure that there's somewhere where they can go. And that's where I think in many, many hospitals things aren't working as they should. The social care system and the healthcare system, they're not properly integrated, not properly talking to each other. Hospitals are saying they're finding it quite difficult to find arrangements to get particularly elderly patients out back into the community, into proper care in the community. And so I think one of the big changes, just as I personally believe that one of the big culture changes in the NHS needs to be to put mental health and physical health on the same footing. And in fact, many people go to A&E, by the way, complaining of physical health conditions, but actually what's driving it is a mental health condition, and that's not being properly identified. I also think bringing the social care and the healthcare systems together. Now, this is starting to happen. It is starting to happen, but it needs to happen on a much larger scale, which is why there's a big thing called a Better Care Fund, which is starting next year, which will sort of bring these two systems together so that when someone is ready to leave hospital, they leave hospital. And I think that is absolutely essential, and in my view, will make the biggest difference in relieving the NHS of this very, very considerable pressure, which is unprecedented and which is clearly placing a lot of strain on hospitals right now.
Can I move to some emails that have come in, Mr.
Sure.
Clegg? This is coming from Manuela in Dartford, who says, as I read magazines over the Christmas and New Year period, I read an interview with Nick Clegg in which he said, when asked if he had the better temper than his wife, he said, Miriam is truly Spanish. I am Spanish, says Manuela. I am Spanish, says Manuela. What did he mean? Ah,
right. I'm going to get into trouble with Manuela and Miriam and thousands of other Hispanic listeners to this show.
Good. That's my intention.
Thank you. Thank you for putting me on the spot.
Yeah. What do you mean by... Hang on, what was it? Miriam is truly Spanish. What's that mean?
Right. What does that mean? That means that the Spanish are a magnificent people, and I think one of the things they pride themselves on is the forcefulness with which they express their opinions and the way in which they don't hide their emotions. I think that is a great virtue. And that's what
so they're hot-tempered?
No, Nick, wash your mouth out. Wash your mouth out.
Suppose they'd been asked instead of being asked.
They are a forthright people, and I'm sure. And it's a pity that Manuela is on email rather than ringing.
Yes,
maybe she'd like to ring.
Any Spanish person, please ring the number now. Suppose the question had been who wears the trousers. Who would have won that one?
I don't think we share the trousers. I don't know.
What an extraordinary thought.
It is extraordinary. It's a slightly extraordinary question. So it deserves an extraordinary answer.
You share the trousers. One more email before we go back to the calls. This comes in from Ken in Kent. On Nick Ferrari's show, Boris Johnson described Prince Andrew as a true virtue and asset to Britain. David Cameron has refused to comment. Which side does Nick Clegg support?
Look, I think to be fair to Boris Johnson and David Cameron, they were saying different things. Boris Johnson was talking about the Prince as an individual. David Cameron, I think, was quite rightly refraining from commenting on these legal cases in the United States, and I very much join him in wanting to obviously allow the statements that have come from Buckingham Palace and from Prince Andrew's team to speak for themselves. I don't think it is for members of the government to start sort of providing their own commentary on that.
But he is an asset to Britain, as the Mayor described him.
Well, I think they're two completely separate things. Clearly, Prince Andrew has played a significant role over a long period of time, and the court cases and the allegations and the complete refutation issued by Buckingham Palace is another.
All right. In the absence of any Spanish callers, and I promise you we shall promote them, we'll promote them to the top of the list. Where do we go now, Mr. Clegg?
Jane in Romford. Hello, Jane.
Hiya.
Hi.
I've got a question about Ted Evans, really. So there's been a lot of stuff in the media about whether or not he should be playing for Oldham.
Yeah.
But being as he's completely refusing to accept his conviction, which is a conviction on his own testimony that he admits he had sex with somebody who was completely incapable of giving consent, and that is rape by our definition. He's appealed his conviction twice and lost. And his behaviour since he's out on licence has been to offer rewards for other things, to provoke stuff. Shouldn't we actually then be asking the police to relook at his licence and revoke it and send him back to prison?
I'm not sure about that, Jane, but look, I mean, I've made my views known on this, not least, of course, because he's a Sheffield United player, and I'm an MP from Sheffield, and it's obviously a very big issue across the country, but most especially perhaps in Sheffield. And as I've said on this show before, he's a convicted rapist. He still professes his innocence, but he was convicted for that, for a very serious crime. I think footballers aren't just how can I say it, athletes. They're also role models, and that's why I've said what I have said about this. I can't follow every twist and turn of what other football clubs might do.
Suppose he signs for Oldham later today. How will you react, Mr. Clegg?
Well, look, my views on footballers being role models, on him being a convicted rapist, and my views about all of that, of course, they don't change. But equally, as I've said all along, football clubs, as well as individual footballers like him, will need to take their own decisions according to their own consciences.
Right.
So
you don't think Oldham should sign him?
Look, I just think he's been convicted of a very serious crime. He certainly hasn't expressed any kind of remorse about that. And as I say, whether it's in Sheffield or in Oldham, these individuals, and he's a good striker, he's a good footballer. They are role models.
How good he is whether he should be signed by Oldham.
Sure. As I say, Oldham need to take their own decisions, and they'll explain them. But of course, my views haven't changed. What I said about his role in Sheffield United, of course, applies. But I don't. But I'm slightly reluctant, not least because I quite rightly spoke out as an MP for Sheffield to provide a running commentary on what every single other football club may or may not say about
but
Ted
if he
Evans.
signs with Oldham, you think it would be a retrograde step if Oldham sign him later today? 80% on is apparently the latest information.
Well,
from Oldham.
We'll see what Oldham say, but my views haven't changed.
Where do we go now?
Next one is Peter in Weymouth. Hello, Peter.
Good morning, Nick.
Hello, Peter.
Nick, 5 days before the first death from these Superman pills, the Trimbos Institute in the Netherlands, a very respected organisation, issued its highest level of warning that these pills were not ecstasy, which is a relatively safe substance, but a highly toxic substance called PMA. Now, our government had that information, but failed to issue any warning in this country, and consequently there were several deaths followed. So my question is, what sanction can we have against government ministers who implement policies that are not based on evidence and actually cause deaths? I mean, Theresa May has blood on her hands.
Let me just remind listeners, this is the dangerous batch of ecstasy which has been linked to the death of 3 men in Suffolk, not passed on to the public by the government. As you rightly say there, Peter, a warning came from the Trimbos Institute in Utrecht in the Netherlands. It is reported on the 19th of December, my apologies. No official warning was made by any British government agency before the first death 5 days later on Christmas Eve. 2 subsequent deaths occurred on New Year's Day. The first death was up in Ipswich, and Deputy Prime Minister Peter is saying there's blood on Theresa May's hands.
Well, I will, of course, Peter, on your behalf, and if I can write to you, Peter, talk to the Home Office about their awareness of the warnings from Trimbos Institute and what steps were or were not taken. I anticipate, because I know this to be the case, that the Home Office have a sort of established process by which warnings are assessed and further warnings are then issued, and simply without knowing the status of the Trimbos Institute or the nature of the warning they issued, I obviously can't tell you that. But what I can do, Peter, if you can give your details to LBC, then I'll get back to you.
Peter, do that. Stay on the line. We'll hand it on to one of Mr. Clegg's team. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
By the way, is it something I said?
What?
Well, you were in Exeter last year, and Sheffield and Bristol. You're in Birmingham. What have I said? Why don't you ever come and see me anymore?
Well, listen, Nick, you have taken LBC national.
I know.
So I feel I should take myself national as well. I'm merely trying to kind of keep up with the breathless reach.
Well, good luck with whatever you're up to in the West. Can I ask you?
I'm actually signing. If you really must know, I'm signing what is called a local growth deal in the Birmingham and Solihull area, which is a kind of deal which will lead to more jobs and more transport investment and more homes being built in the West Midlands. And I was obviously very keen to be here.
Excellent.
To do that.
Well, good luck with that, and let's hope that the jobs can come as quickly as possible. For
Indeed.
The folk there. Are you happy?
Yes. Why?
Because I saw you on PMQs yesterday. And
your sympathy
it was your
so
birthday as
heartwarming.
well, wasn't it, I believe?
It was my about 48.
Well, happy birthday to you, Mr. But you didn't look like a man who was enjoying his birthday. You got those two Herberts shouting at each other. And you just have to sit there with absolutely button lips. You don't like that, do you?
Well, we spoke about this before, but I'm not going to pretend that sitting there and watching my two main rivals
or
Herberts, the two Herberts, as they from now on will be known in Lib Dem circles, the two Herberts, sort of going at each other, hammer and tongs. I have to sort of sit there on my hands. Do I enjoy it? No. Is it part of my sort of front bench role? Yes. Am I going to do it every week? No. But there you go. That's one of the reasons I hope actually there's going to be television debates. So you can hear from all of us. You can hear from all the Herberts from all directions in politics.
All five Herberts.
All Herberts. Yeah.
But it's no way to spend a birthday, Mr. Clegg.
Well, it's what needs must on one's birthday.
Did you do something special? Did you have a nice meal?
Miriam and I went. Miriam and I, we took the boys out to Wagamama's, which was because they like that, and it's quite and it's quick, and it's very tasty and it's very good and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then Miriam and I went. Actually, the first time Miriam and I have been out for a sort of, if you like, a date without the boys for ages. We went to see that film about A Theory of Everything. The film about Stephen Hawking. Yeah, very, very, very
enjoyable movie.
Yeah, very moving. Very moving.
Okay, very good indeed. Still no Spanish callers, I sense. So where should we go, Mr. Clegg?
The next Michelle in Islington. Hello, Michelle.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Not at all. Hi, Michelle.
I've got something personal. I've got an 8-year-old son who has, just before Christmas, was permanently excluded from school. Oh. He's in year 3. By the end of reception, he was on School Action Plus, and it was apparent that there were needs there. He was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. We applied last year for a statutory assessment for a statement. We got turned down. We appealed, and we had a tribunal hearing set for March this year. As I said, he's now been permanently excluded from school. I then received a phone call to say that now that they will now carry out a statutory assessment, he has now been diagnosed with ADHD. He's been sent to a pupil referral unit, which he started just before the Christmas break, and he's due to go back on Monday. Now, the timetable for this pupil referral unit is 9:15 to 2:45, and on a Thursday it's 9:15 to 12:15. Now, both me and his father
I'm going to have to move you to a question. I'm terribly sorry, Michelle. I've only got about 5 minutes left of the Deputy Prime Minister.
Both me and his father work full-time, and we've been told there is no help. So how, as full-time working parents, are we supposed to get to the school, the pupil referral unit, at 2:45?
Yes,
or even on a Thursday, finish at 12:15?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, Michelle, I can see the dilemma. Can I ask just a question, Michelle, when he was at school before he was excluded, just remind me again, he was excluded in the autumn of last year, was it?
No, he was excluded just before the Christmas break.
Right. So, but in reception in years 1 and 2, what did you and your husband, he would leave school at 3, I guess, or...
Well, no, he started reception, and we knew that there was needs there.
No, sorry, I meant about this juggling of your time, given you both work. What would happen to him after? What I mean is the school hours.
He's due to go back on Monday. The first 3, he was only there 3 days before the Christmas break, and we took time off work to pick him up.
Yeah.
He goes back on Monday. We still don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Anyway, what I was asking was, I mean, what happened to him if he was at school? Would you be picking him up then?
He goes to after school club.
He goes to after school club, right? And of course, though, at the school itself. Yeah, got it. So and there's no such arrangement at the pupil referral unit.
Quite how you manage this, to be honest, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mr.
no. It's. I can see your dilemma, Michelle. I don't, of course, have a magic wand answer for you on air like this.
Surely it's a conversation to be had, Michelle, possibly with the teachers, and if you laid out your problems, would there perhaps be some area in which they can help? I think it's asking a lot of Mr. Clegg to effect anything there. Mr. Clegg, is that? Yeah.
Have you spoken to your local MP, Michelle, and your local council?
I'm waiting to hear back. Okay. I've contacted Children's Services. They've also told me that there's no help.
I'll tell you what, we'll solve this. I'll tell you what, stop. I can solve this. Talk to one of my team. We'll put in some phone calls. I've just worked this out. Let's actually take something away from the Deputy Prime Minister's office. Let's get LBC involved. You often find when media organisations get involved in these sort of things, suddenly time can be found and appointments can be moved. Stay on the line, Michelle. My team will take care of this one, which frees the Deputy Prime Minister. And thank you for your call, and I promise you we will act on this. Mr. Clegg, I give you my word, we'll act on it. As we move on to the next call, where should we go next, Mr. Clegg?
Next call is Terry in Byfleet. Hello, Terry.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Morning.
Would you agree with me that the infrastructure of our small island is not being able to cope with the lack of control of immigration? Because at the end of the day, it's numbers. And for the last 40 years, government-averse persuasions have failed to control immigration. Ever since the days of Enoch Powell, a quietly spoken, very intelligent man stood up in the House of Commons and said he was worried about the lack of control. And he was labelled a racialist. Well, things are coming true now. We are unable to cope. And the problems of the NHS is its numbers. And the government, if it wasn't for UKIP, I don't think the government would do anything about immigration.
Let's get a response from Mr. Clegg.
So, Terry, I mean, first, of course, it's not in any way racist to talk about immigration and how people come in into this country, leave this country, and how we count people in and count people out, and what controls we have in place and what we don't. It is, however, at the same time about striking the right balance. You mentioned the NHS, for instance. The NHS would collapse overnight if we simply pulled up the drawbridge. We rely very heavily on nurses and doctors from elsewhere around Europe and the world to provide care and excellent care to our to patients, to British patients in the NHS. Our economy depends hugely, and millions of jobs of fellow British citizens on the ability for people to come here, to invest, to create companies and to create jobs. So you need to create the right balance between having an open and generous-hearted society, but one nonetheless where we have a much greater and clearer idea about who's coming in and who's coming out, and that we close the loopholes which have been abused in the past, where people have come in illegally or have overstayed their visa. That's which has been one of the biggest problems of illegal immigration in our country. That's why, for instance, Terry, I've been personally so insistent over such a long period of time. And I think we're finally making some progress after some sort of inaction, which sort of delayed things. We're finally making some progress on putting in proper controls at our borders, so not only we know who's coming in, but we also know who's leaving. Because if you don't know who's leaving, you can't check whether people are overstaying their entitlement to stay in this country or not. So I do think you can put in new controls, but equally, Terry, where I suspect you and I might slightly disagree is that we've also got to recognise that immigration plays a role in helping run our NHS and helping keep our economy strong.
Let's finish with one final call, if we can, Deputy Prime Minister. We go to, I think, is it off to Croydon, I think, and Omar. Can we put you through? Yes. Omar, go ahead. You're through to Mr. Clegg. Go ahead with your question.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Hello, Omar.
Hi there. I just want to speak a bit about the tragedy, obviously, that happened yesterday in France. And I want to say that by purely just saying that, based on the cartoons, this incident happened, isn't it treating it quite superficially? The cartoons, perhaps you could look at it, was the straw that broke the camel's back, and when ministers, etc., start talking about, okay, what's happened there, why do they never talk about, foreign, everything else that's going on, and then this happens at the end of it? I'm sure if you look at these people, they're claiming to be defending the honour of the Prophet, and they'll come out in days, I'm sure, when they look into their lives, that was their lifestyle commensurate with people who love the Prophet, peace be on him, and you'll find that it wasn't. So it's not just the love of the Prophet which has caused this action, it's a lot more. And this is always taken out of the discussion, and they just focus on the cartoons. And, it's completely doing a disservice to the reality of how many 1.4 billion Muslims around the world feel. And
sorry, Omar, I've got to interrupt. I think if I understand you correctly, I cannot express to you how strongly I disagree with you. I mean, I'll tell you why. Because there can be no excuse, no reason, no explanation. No, hang on. Sorry.
Hang on, Omar.
No, wait a minute, Omar. They have killed cartoonists who have done nothing more than draw drawings which they so happen to find offensive. And do you know what? Here's the bottom line, Omar. At the end of the day, in a free society, people have to be free to offend each other. You cannot have freedom unless people are free to offend each other. We have no right not to be offended. And that fundamental principle of being free to offend people, and not saying that you have somehow a right not to be offended in a democratic, open society such as ours, is exactly what was under threat by these murderous barbarians. And to even suggest, Omar, that there is a rationale, an explanation, a motive that somehow absolves them or sheds greater light on such a horrific, cold-hearted, cowardly act, I find that
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And this is what they feel is meted out to them daily, weekly, yearly for a number of years now. And it's not just the cartoons. No one's saying it's just the cartoons. That's absolutely horrific what's happened. But why is the rest of the discussion not brought in? If they feel that, look, America, they were complicit in torture globally. It's all of these together. Iraq being invaded.
But Omar, for heaven's sake, don't mix things. I mean, of course it is utterly wrong. And I've talked about it on this programme before. It is utterly wrong, the way in which it now appears that that the American intelligence agencies and others, according to that report, were doing things which are which are totally unacceptable in a law-abiding society. But to somehow mix that in any way with the perverted things that must have been going on in the heads of these individuals, to go into a newspaper office and shoot cartoonists. I mean, that you're even drawing the link, I find so inexplicable. There is no link which can in any way seek to explain such a random, such a cruel, such a cowardly act as what we saw in Paris yesterday.
And in attempted explanation, lastly, Omar, thank you for your call. Earlier in the show, we spoke with Nigel Farage, who was talking about whether multiculturalism had led to certain issues.
The real question is this. We in Britain, and I've seen some evidence in other European countries of it too, have pursued a really rather gross policy of multiculturalism. And by that, what I mean is that we've encouraged people who've come from different cultures to remain within those cultures and not to integrate fully within our communities.
Nick Cle, do you recognise a gross policy of multiculturalism?
Well, I just find it very. I'm dismayed, really, that Nigel Farage immediately thinks, on the back of the bloody murders that we saw on the streets of Paris yesterday, that his first reflex is to seek to make political points. Let's remember, if this does come down to, and we've touched on this already in response to Omar's question and indeed Nigel Farage's assertions, if this does come down, as it appears to be the case, to two individuals who've perverted the cause of Islam to their own bloody ends, let's remember the greatest antidote to the perversion of that great world religion, Islam, are law-abiding British Muslims themselves. And to immediately somehow suggest that somehow, or to imply that many British Muslims who I know feel fervently British but also are very proud of their Muslim faith are somehow part of the problem rather than part of the solution, I think is firmly grabbing the wrong end of the stick.
I wish you well with your voice, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you, hopefully, in the studio next week, unless your nationwide odyssey.
Looking forward to it.
Nationwide odyssey continues. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, appearing here on Call Clegg on LBC, where news is next.
The Deputy Prime Minister has told LBC, in a free society, we need to be free to offend each other. It follows an attack at the